would conscience be associated with Christ in the soul? And so you could imagine this. So one of the implicit messages of the story of the Christian passion is that you're called upon to sacrifice everything in the pursuit of what's highest, right? Absolutely everything, which is why Christ's passion is a story of the confrontation with the most miserable possible death and also with the deepest reaches of malevolence, right? And the implication of the story is that despite the existence of those two things, that you're called upon to act in the most positive manner. And so then, if you're sinning, you're violating that pattern of action, and the conscience is what calls you on the violation of that sacrificial relationship. And that's why there's an association between the conscience and Christ in the soul, right? Because you're not, what the conscience tells you is that you are not being sufficiently, what would you say? You're not being sufficiently religious in your sacrifices. That's exactly what you're being called upon. And you might think, well, I don't want to give that up. It's like, well, yeah, you don't want to, but that's not the point. Is that if you're going to pursue what is truly highest, you have to give up everything that's lowest. And if you don't pursue what's highest and give up what's lowest, then life will arrange itself against you very rapidly. And that, you can just think about that practically. It's like if you conducted yourself so that you took the lesser victory over the greater victory, and you did that constantly, then you would lose. It's the definition of losing. And what your conscience does is inform you when you're losing, even in ways that you would rather not admit. Right, and so there is no difference between that and the call to the highest sacrifice.
Jonah heard the voice of his conscience, but then didn't follow it.
Right.
And what
then all
follows
hell
from
broke
that
loose.
is disaster for you and for the people around you.
Right.
So it's not just a private thing. Oh boy, I did something wrong. It's going to really hurt me. It'll hurt people around you.
Yeah, worse even maybe.
Yeah.
You know, well, I mean, if you misbehave when you're a child, if you misbehave, and this might even be true when you're an adult, when your parents are still around, it isn't obvious at all that your misbehavior hurts you more than it hurts your parents. Right, and in totalitarian states, is a good example of this. A totalitarian state is a state where every single person is lying about absolutely everything all the time. And so each person lies in the moment to protect themselves against the consequences of the truth, at least momentarily. They pretend to believe things that they don't, what the Soviets used to joke. We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. It's like, yeah, that's a great Russian joke, that is. And that leads right to unbelievable poverty and misery. And, you know, every person who's rationalized lying in the system is saying, well, I have to lie because the consequences of telling the truth will be so great. But the cumulative consequence of those individual lies is literally that everyone lives in hell. And so one of the things your conscience tells you, and it really tells you this, is when you lie, you are moving towards hell. And not just for you, but for everyone around you, everyone you love, and all your descendants. And like, it's a terrible thing that that's true.
God can swallow up your errant will and spit you out exactly where you're supposed to be. So the whale there, the fish, is not a negative thing. It's swallowing up this errant will of Jonah and then confining it. So it needed confining, it needed restriction, but then it spits him up.
It needed the suffering, possibly.
It needed the suffering, right. And then spits him up exactly where he's supposed to be. And so, like, how do we read times of depression and times of deep darkness? You know, at de profundis, you know, from the depths I cry to you, Lord. Well, good, it might be a depth imposed upon you by God to limit this errant will. But then God will take you where you don't want to go, where he wants you to go.
And to what end is, you know, to what end? I think it goes back in so many ways, because he wants you to be like him.
Yeah.
Because there's that sense of like, okay, I'm going to give you these gifts, give you what, and this burden. Why? Because in bearing this burden well, you'll become like me. That's one of the reasons Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me.
Yeah.
Say, do this, whatever the burden, whatever